Let us now look at inside of psychoanalysis, how the world of psychoanalysis is constituted. And we realize that when we say psychoanalysis, there is no one school of psychoanalysis, but within psychoanalysis, you have so many schools, and some of the schools have listed here. On the screen, you find listed some schools of psychoanalysis. This is not an exhaustive list. Let's look at them one by one. The first school is by Freud, Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, Melanie Klein, Donald Winnicott, Heinz Kohut, Jacques Lacan, Wilfred Bion, and Habib Devanlu. There are some more, but these are the main ones. And you can see all of them differ from each other in certain ways, but all of them subscribe to the basic principles of psychoanalysis. So all of them believe in the existence of the unconscious, primacy of unconscious, significance of primacy of childhood, catharsis, making the unconscious conscious, integration. On these points, all of them are the same. They agree, but they differ on some of the points which are given in the box. So what we saw here, on these points, they all agree, and therefore they are all schools of psychoanalysis. But where they disagree from each other is this, what is given in the square, in the box. They differ from each other in terms of model of the mind. Freud has a different model of the mind. Jung has a different model of the mind. And apart from them, nobody else gave a full structural model of the mind, but they gave certain phenomena which they thought were very important. So the first difference in all the schools is in the model of the mind, the structure of the psyche. Second difference in all of these schools is the course of development. What is most important in the first 5 years? They all agree the first 5 years are most important, but what happens at 6 months, 1 year, second year, third year, in that kind of situation, they have differences. They are different because they believe the forces and processes which are involved are different. They are different because some believe in materialism, some believe in idealism. They are different because they believe with different emphasis on nature and nurture. This is very important. That how much of our mind is because of our constitution and how much is it because of our experience in our family and society. So we have this nature versus nurture debate. So if a person comes depressed to us, how much of the depression is because of his constitution and how much is it because of the family or society? So constitution we refer to by nature, family, society and the environment we refer to by nurture. So all the experiences in the outer world are under the head of nurture. All experiences of the inner world, the way you interpret the outside is because of nature. Assume same experience is given to two children. One of them develops a trauma, the other is able to cope up with it. So the outside is the same, but the way the outside is interpreted is different. So nature is our constitution, how we interpret our experiences. Nurture is the outside environment, our experiences in the real world outside. They differ in terms of what are the strongest forces in man. Take for example, for Freud, sexuality was one of the strongest forces in human nature. For Jung, sexuality was not the strongest force in human nature. Individuation self-development was the strongest force. For Adler, power and inferiority, domination and submission were very important parts, even more important than sexuality. For Klein, the ability to give up extreme thinking, resolve the paranoid schizoid split, and come to a depressive position. We will talk about it when we come there. And managing the forces of pure aggression was very important. For Winnicott, the strongest element in childhood was the presence or absence of a good enough mother. Whether or not a good enough mother was present in childhood or not was the critical thing which would determine the psychological health of the person. For Kohut, early life recognition, admiration, and empathy were very important. If in early life we did not have recognition, admiration, empathy, holding, we would be in trouble as adults. Right? And so on and so forth. We can just go on. Every person has his own view of what are the strongest forces in man. Naturally, therefore, yeah, sorry. On another point where every school differs is the course of knowing. In therapy, how do we proceed to know our unconscious mind, to know ourselves, and to get out of our difficulty? Where should we focus upon? When a person comes to a therapy room and starts talking, where should we allow it to just pass by, and where should we focus? What course of self-knowing should we take? So the course of self-knowing is different. And the course of therapy. In Freudian classical therapy, you have to go to therapy 3 to 5 days a week. And the session is of 50 minutes or 1 hour. Jung had a different idea about therapy. He would say not more than twice a week. In extreme cases, it would be thrice a week. So for Jung, thrice a week would be maximum. For Freud, thrice a week would be minimum. For Jung, therapy would be done face to face. Both the people are sitting on the chair. Right? For Freud, the therapist is sitting in the chair, but the client is on the couch. So the way it happened was very different. In case of Jung, he would do substantial self-revelation. The therapist often opens up himself, gives personal information about himself. In Freudian or Kleinian approach, this is a strict taboo. You have to be a blank screen and be as anonymous as possible, not to give any personal information to the client. So the course of therapy in all the schools is very different. In case of Freud, the session is of classical 50 minutes. Some people do 45 minutes. Some people do 1 hour. For Jung, it is classically 1 hour. Client also 45 minutes to 1 hour. But Lacan has a very different take. He uses what is called variable session, which means the session can be shortened to less than 45 minutes, or it can be elongated to more than 1 hour. In case of ISTDP propounded by Devanlu, the session can easily be 1.5 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. You can easily have a 3-hour session, even a 4-hour session. So each of them differs in terms of length of session, how the session should be done, face to face or on the couch, once a week, thrice a week, or 5 times a week. What to do in the session? Should you direct the session or should you allow free flow? Where should you stress upon? Where should you just let it pass? So all these points, on all these points, all these schools differ. So while they all agree on the fundamental principles of psychoanalysis, on these points they differ. And therefore the question arises, which school is suited for what kind of patient? If you have to go to a particular school for therapy, where would you like to go? And each school naturally has its own form, its own uniqueness of what it calls psychoanalytic psychotherapy. So it is very important to find out what we find convincing to us, what resonates with us, and take up that school and go deeper into. So the way forward is, nobody can be an expert in all the schools. So go deep in one school and have a good perspective of other schools. That is the best way out. Now, which school to go deep into depends on your personal liking, your personality, and your experience as a healer. What do you think works best in your context? So in your social context and your personal likings and your intellectual conviction of what school has the best gravity according to your opinion, you choose to go deeper in that particular school. The most classical way is people start with Freud and then go deeper in Klein, or go deeper in Lacan or Winnicott, but people usually start with Freud. So some people start with Freud and they remain with Freud, although they have a perspective of other schools, but they remain with Freud. Some people start with Freud, learn it, and then go to whatever school they want. And that I think is a better way of doing it. That learn Freud first, invariably. Then if you like Freud, be with Freud, have a perspective of other schools. Or if you feel Jung, Klein or Kohut or Devanlu are more appealing to you, go to that school. Even then, have a perspective of other schools. Now, this also has an important element for those who wish to get trained as therapists. Because if you wish to get trained as a therapist, you have to undergo your own therapy for 2 years as a part of the training process. And that is called training analysis. So if you wish to take up your career as a cohesion analyst, it is better to undergo the 2 years of training with a cohesion analyst. If you want to practice Freudian psychoanalysis in your career, it is better to undergo your 2 year of training analysis as a Freudian, with a Freudian analyst. So this has some implications. So you can take those decisions once you have a small perspective of all these schools. Then you can take a call on what resonates with you and which school you would like to take up for a deeper engagement. And wherever you decide, do your 2 year of training analysis in that particular school. Any questions on this?
No.
No.
Let us look at the evolution of psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis started with Sigmund Freud. Carl Jung was a contemporary of Freud. So while Freud was doing the first thing, Carl Jung, Ferenczi and the whole team, the first team of psychoanalysis was there, but Freud was the founder who has extensively worked and created this discipline. If you look at all these schools of psychoanalysis, okay, all these schools today, if you look back, we divide all the schools in psychoanalysis into 5 categories. Right? The first category of schools is what is called the drive frustration model. So whenever you find a school of psychoanalysis where the core conflict is understood as a conflict because there is a desire and the desire is frustrated. There is a drive and the drive is frustrated. So you can say drive is almost a synonym for desire. There is a desire and the desire is frustrated, and that frustration the person is not able to swallow or regulate or manage, and therefore the difficulty, the symptom or the sickness. So all schools which essentially focus on this element of the mind and pathology and healing, they are called drive frustration schools, where the core understanding of conflict and healing is that the conflict is because of frustration of a drive, that there is a desire, maybe desire for sexuality, a desire for power, a desire for money, or whatever it is, but the intense desire is frustrated. And when an intense desire is frustrated, pathology begins. So if you look at drive frustration model, Freud's school falls in the drive frustration model. Second category is object relations. Here the basic belief is that problems arise not because a desire is frustrated, but because of some problem in relationship with people. In technical language, we call object. So object does not mean inanimate object. It means any object, any entity with whom we psychologically relate. So when we use the word object in psychology, we don't mean a thing. We don't mean an inanimate object. We mean any entity with whom we are relating psychologically. So object relation schools in psychoanalysis are those where the first focus is on something going wrong in the object relations, not necessarily a drive frustration. So when we say drive, right, we are looking at very strong instinctual drives. Of course, there is desire behind the drive. There is desire behind the object relations. Of course, true. Desire is the root of everything. But the instinctual drive frustration is one way of looking at pathology. Object relations is a second way. So the understanding here is that something is going wrong in early life in our relationship with objects with whom we want to relate. And essentially that is the mother and the father. And because something is going wrong there, the difficulty is arising. And why something is going wrong there? That is because of the way the phenomena happen in early life. Constitutionally, the way our mind operates in early life. So the problems arise either because people we want to relate with are not good enough, or our interpretation of what people do is such that even if people are good, we start interpreting that they are not good enough. So the problem can be nature or nurture, but something goes wrong in the object relations in the early life. In this category falls Klein's school, school of Melanie Klein. We'll come to each of these schools, each of these founders later on. For the moment, just make note of the information that is given to you. We'll go into details of it later. At some point in the history of psychoanalysis, there was a very strong clash between the Freudian school and the Kleinian school. The Kleinian school led by Mrs. Klein, Melanie Klein, and the Freudian school led at that point, after the death of Freud, by his daughter Anna Freud. So in that struggle, some analysts wanted to take neither of the positions but take position on merit. And they created a school which is called the independent school. So at that point, particularly in UK, England, after the Second World War, there was a clash between the Freudian and the Kleinian groups, and some people wanted to be independent of that conflict. So they created the independent group. Winnicott's school falls in that independent group. Then we have the self-psychology. So self-psychology category is a fourth category of psychoanalytic schools, and thinkers like Kohut and Icon, they all fall under the self-psychology school. And in self-psychology school, the focus is on creating a healthy self. Now, what is a self we will come to later. For the moment, just make a note of the point that we are looking at a healthy self. A rough way to understand that is that we may have problems of drive frustration, we may have problems of object relations of early life, but our ego can manage both of them if the ego is strong enough, and the strength of the ego comes from the strength of the self. So if we have a healthy self, even though something at the level of drive or object relations is not okay, we can put a lid on it and not allow it to explode. So it remains in the unconscious, even if not resolved, but does not create a symptom. That's a rough way of understanding it. We'll come to it later. And then fifth is the intersubjective school. And in the intersubjective school, we will have thinkers like Stern and Benjamin. I forgot to write it here. Where the idea is that it is not only the patient who is coming to a therapist who is a blank screen, but actually the therapist also brings his own specificity. And the specificity of the two individuals in the therapy room creates a particular atmosphere in the context of which and within which the process of therapy happens. So it is two subjectivities coming together, the subjectivity of the patient and the subjectivity of the therapist, creating an intersubjective space by interaction. And in that space, the therapy process actually proceeds. So there are actually two transferences and two counter transferences in the room. This is what they say. Of course, it is true. We'll go into it in details later. Now, if we look at the schools, which thinkers have carried on further the work of the founding masters? So just to give a little information, after Freud, his work was carried forward by his daughter, Anna Freud. Hartmann created ego psychology and did a lot of work in post-Freudian way. Karen Horney has taken it forward. The Kleinian work, the contributors have been after Klein, Hannah Siegel, Betty Joseph, Rosenfield, and so on. Donald Belzer is one of my favorites because it deals with psychoanalysis, art, creativity, and so on. Beyond, we can see Antonino Ferro and Chris Mawson. Winnicott, we can see Cohorn and Abram. Kohut, we can say Ornstein. And Lacan, Elian Miller, and I think now Slovan Zizek, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So they have.
Selvok Zizek?
Sorry?
It's a Selvok Zizek
Yes,
you're
yes.
talking about?
Right. So difficult to pronounce French names. So they have carried forward the work of these original founding masters. So whatever school you are interested in, after finishing the founding master and the core foundational conceptual area, you can go to the post contributors. So that will give a real depth. We will take a few papers from each of them as we go along. So once we finish Freud, we will take up a few papers from Anna Freud, Karen Horney, and so on. So that will like consolidate Freud. Let us look at the genesis of psychoanalysis. And with this, we will end for today. Psychoanalysis was founded by Sigmund Freud. He is called the father of psychoanalysis. He was trained as a neurologist, slowly turned to psychoanalysis. And the development of psychoanalysis is very interesting. It starts with the first publication, cases on hysteria. Studies in hysteria, sorry. Studies in hysteria. And hysteria was very common at that point. And the way it developed was, Freud was working with a senior person, their brother, and he used to go to he used to do home visits. So initially people thought of psychological sicknesses basically being only biochemical in nature or organic in nature, structural in nature, or even functional, then basically biochemical. What happened was, when Brewer used to go on a home visit to a person, there's a very famous case, the case of NAO. We will take a look at that case, the case of NAO. The patient said that she feels relief the most when she is allowed to talk out her heart. And allowing her to talk out gives her more relief than any other medication or dietary advice or lifestyle advice which she implements. And this was very strange, and she used to call it the talking cure. That the more you talk it out, the better you feel. And therefore, something strange was acknowledged, that we are talking here of a psychological phenomena which is leading to biochemistry of a particular type, not the other way around. So we are looking at a bidirectional traffic. Not only that biochemistry can lead to feelings, of course they can. If you give an antidepressant to a person, of course the mood changes. So biochemistry does lead to a change does lead to a psychological event. But the other route is also equally true. That psychological events also lead to biochemical changes. So the causality is not unidirectional. We are looking at a bidirectional process. So whenever she was allowed to talk, she felt better. And she started calling it the talking cure. And this became very famous later on. Freud started taking a clue from here, and he started talking to her, and he realized the more you allow people with psychological difficulties to talk out their heart, the better they feel. The moment the unconscious is articulated and expressed out, in some way it exhausts itself to some degree. Second, Freud realized the more he allowed them to talk about their childhood, they felt even better. So talking made them feel better. Talking about childhood made them feel even more better. And if they could really talk about their sexuality, they would feel even better. So Freud realized if he could channelize that conversation into childhood and into sexuality, the gains of health were even more, which was strange. So this was developed by Freud later, but in between, what happened was he also was experimenting with hypnosis. That in hypnosis, can we bring out those memories of childhood which the person does not have access to in the waking state? Can we give suggestions for healing the person? And he got mixed results in hypnosis. There were two difficulties. One, everyone could not be hypnotized. And two, in many cases, the gains of hypnosis were short-lived and there was a relapse of the problem coming back. So, and of course, there was some healing also. It is not that the results were zero, but there were limitations. So Freud started moving then from hypnosis to free association. And the method he developed was this. The person comes to the therapy room, lies down on the couch, and just speaks whatever comes to his mind without any censorship. And the analyst or the therapist tries to figure out from what the person is speaking in the free flow, what is in the unconscious mind, brings it to the notice of the person, and when the lock fits the key, the lever start moving inside, and something changes. This method essentially is even the same method today in the Freudian and Kleinian in classical psychoanalytic situations. ISTDP, Jung, they have taken a different route, but by and large, it is still the same situation in an essential sense. Specifics have changed, but essentials are still the same. That we are still, psychoanalysis is a talking cure. It is based upon knowing what is the unconscious, what is the content of the unconscious and healing it. And this knowing happens by free association, by dream analysis. Dream analysis is very important to psychoanalysis. We'll spend considerable period of time in dream analysis also. So this continues, right? And what is taboo usually goes in the unconscious mind. So intense sexuality, intense aggression, intense envy, intense guilt, intense shame, these are the most common phenomena we encounter in the unconscious mind, which are at the root of pathology and suffering. So from then to today, there have been innovations, there have been trials and errors, there have been scientific investigations, there have been additions from the holistic side. Essential parts still today are the same, but because of research, development, addition of tools, addition of perspectives, knowledge addition, holistic healing coming to the center, things have got more comprehensive, more choice driven, and far more open and considerate than they were in early days of psychoanalysis. Any questions on this?
No, not yet.
Okay. So we are nearing time. So let us stop for the day. And I'll give you some post-class viewing of videos to consolidate what we have done today. And from next time, slowly we will develop the perspective. And once we develop the perspective in generality, taking an overall picture, the broad picture, we will then start with Sigmund Freud. And I'm sure you will have many questions today after you go back. Bring up the questions next time. More questions we discuss, better it will be for everyone. So let's talk for the day. See you then next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.